The coal steam idea was a bust. Thorian quirked a brow. An almost smile settled on his lips as he contemplated the frazzled mess of man before him. Oh yes, frazzled indeed, but not at all lacking in composure. Most of the eccentricity of the man's appearance was due to any number of heel scars, grafts, and in some places outright replacements of various bits of not just clothing but body parts. Would it be rude of me to say I am unsurprised? Of course not. It was my idea to begin with. Not every wad of shit has to stick to the wall, you know. He had long since learned to quell his distaste at the thoughtless impropriety of the other man. Some folks came from less than polite society, after all. His was an institute designed around accepting even those from the lowest walks of life. Some of them were utter geniuses, after all. So then, you are not one to come to me with your hands behind your back whilst woefully reporting failure. Out with it, Phineas. What manners have you concocted this time? Thorian could practically see the glee straining at the other's many seams. Already a gnarled, stitch-crossed hand had flung out to gesticulate as he began to lay out his points. I don't know if you remember, but Miss Metalworks Guildess said her adamantine bubble cooled a bit when I set up the whole coal steam thing with the void. Coal steam is apparently more accurate than I first thought, but that's a tangent. The idea failed pretty much immediately, anyway. I'd already figured since the water dissolved in a lack of air, that any given steam system would need a similar lack of air, or it would otherwise recondense, but, well, the Windworks said that sort of thing just wasn't feasible. They did also say that the voice I was making was something they were already kind of screwing with to begin with. Thorian almost immediately cut the man off with a raised hand, nearly failing to stifle his alarm in the process. You what? They've been opening void portals too? No, the opposite actually. Or, well, maybe not the opposite, but a different thing. So, air flows like water. We've already figured this. But that means that there's a point where there can be an absence of air. The voids, of course. Except that instead of making portals like I've been, they've just been moving the air elsewhere. Air can be squished, after all, so they've been compacting it in spheres with the help of metalworks. Apparently, only the Windworks really knew about this because it was such a sensitive thing that nobody else could really sense it, much less take advantage. Windworks was experimenting, as I said, but they don't have any crazes to speed things along. Thorian leaned a little further back into his chair. Plush velvet. So very comfortable. Only from the best skins moulded by the meatworks. But he was getting distracted. Vinius's mind tended to wander. He rambled. It wasn't a thoughtless ramble, though. That was what made it difficult to listen at times, actually. Thorian stifled a quiet chuckle as he considered just how dense the information was. That villainous was prone to spouting off without a thought. Said that because the water vapor wasn't as thick as the air around it, exposing it to air quickly caused it to recondense, and the metalworks said there just wasn't a means yet of making a fully closed system to maintain a void to, well, avoid that recondensing. And anyway, none of the waterworks nor windworks would be able to get in and futz with the water steam combo to move it to places they need to. But I got to talking with the windworks a bit more. And speaking of, Fireworks is interested in what the Metalworks Guildess said about her adamantine calling. I think they've got a hook on an idea. Something about getting with the meatworks for food storage. But anyway, the Windworks said that an absence of air can be just as useful as a presence of the stuff, and I kinda immediately clued into what they were saying. In that voids generate wind as air goes to fill them, so I went back to the copper expert in the metalworks and asked him for a tube. We cobbled together a set of turbines. He capped one end of the tube, I stuck a void portal at the capped end, and bam! Spinning turbines. Indefinitely, actually. Or, well, for as long as I've got the energy to maintain the portal. I figure I can delegate once I get the trick of it out to some of the other folks interested. Vinius finally stopped to take a breath. A half-giggling little thing. Apparently he'd had an amusing thought, but Thorian raised a hand to forestall the tide for just a bit longer. So, to summarize, you've taken your original thought, cut out yet more of our mageworks, and deconvoluted the materials needed in the process. Vinius blinked, and then beamed a smile so pleased, Thorian was reminded once more exactly why he had chosen to open his organization's doors to anyone. Why, yes, I did do that. Or, well, the Windworks helped out by shooting the original thought down. There's a few other things related, actually. He paused just long enough to get just the first hint of motion waving him onward, before letting words spill from crooked, scarred lips once more. So, that thing with the fireworks, I actually looked into that a little bit too. Turns out when water expands to fill a void, it ends up pulling a chunk of heat out of whatever it's in contact with. That's what the Earthworks Guildess had felt that first time. You know she dabbles in a bit of fire. Well, so, the fireworks had this thought that the idea could be used on a larger scale, and I told them to go talk to the Windworks about maybe not a larger scale, so much as a denser scale, which actually led me to that whole first bit about Windworks fucking with voids themselves. Or, well, the other way around, actually. But not really. So, Fireworks got with me about sending the Guildess their way about the calling, and I was already on my way to the Windworks, and then I kind of went off on a tangent with Windworks, and they ended up offering the compression idea for me to give to Fireworks. So Fireworks wasn't trying to make absurd amounts of normal steam for whatever they had in mind. But that's another tangent. It was always interesting watching the man recollect his thoughts. Thorian fancied he could see the gears spinning behind those sharp green eyes. Ah, right. I need the meatworks again. You what? Vinius had, up until his point, been observing at least one tenet of politeness. Hands behind the back, one of them at least. It had entirely slipped Thorian's mind, so it came as a bit of a shock when the man brought the one hand forward, and it was a perfectly black mess of already dead flesh. Any interrogation by the Guildsmaster was forestalled by a sleeve being pulled up to reveal it was in fact Vinius's entire arm that had been killed off. And from the flowery, almost petal-like patterns of purple on black. That looks like frostbite. I can't imagine you got in an argument with the waterworks again. Thorian's barely composed sarcasm seemed to fly right over the other man's head. No, not at all. We're thick as thieves after I relieved so many of them from steam duty. Or, will have relieved. Still gotta train Voidworks folks first. No, I stuck my hand in a void portal. Intentionally, this time. I thought as much. I'd forbid you from magic entirely with how often you seem to nearly kill yourself with the stuff, if you weren't simultaneously so competent. In fact, you best give me a very good reason not to do so entirely, while I put the word out for another meat worker. Their services are expensive, I'll have you know, and I'm certain you can manage just as well with theoretical works. Vinius seemed less perturbed at the idea of expense than that of being unable to work magic at all. And it seemed, with the pain in his dying limb, that explained the occasional pauses in his rambling, at least. Thorian couldn't help but consider just how well the man was managing despite what was probably monumental agony. Well, the other end is cold, obviously. One of my fingers also exploded, I think. I'm not sure I entirely get why, but I think if we put our heads together, the Meatworks and Windworks will probably have an answer. Yeah, so cold. I don't know if I've told you this, but I'm not actually sure where the void portals really lead either. I figured I could find out if I stuck my hand in, you know? I didn't think to try and feel around the last time, so I figured I'd give it another go and see what's up. You're telling me you've been opening holes to who knows where, that just so happen to act as all-devouring pits for anything they come in contact with, and you don't even know where it is exactly that they are? Well, that's why I stuck my hand in one, so I could find out. That's a really big question, after all. You know I couldn't let it go unanswered. Only just now could Thorian feel the beginnings of a headache blooming behind his eyes. The last dose of medicine from the meatworks had apparently faded out entirely. He let loose a long, exasperated sigh. Well, what did you find out then? Well, the sky is hollow, and the world is round. You what?